Father Casey Cole, he put out this video on communion on the tongue, communion in the hand. I'm just going to play you this video because I do want to kind of just touch on one little thing on this video that he did. So let me just play you this and just do a very short commentary, a catechesis on how to receive communion and what is the norm of the Roman Rite.
At communion time at Mass, you are bound to see a variety of postures and devotion when it comes to receiving communion: standing, kneeling, in the hand, and on the tongue. Which is the correct way to receive? In the 2003 American edition of the General Instruction of the Roman Missal, the Church strongly preferred standing as the normative posture. Quote, "The norm for reception of Holy Communion in the dioceses of the United States is standing. Communicants should not be denied Holy Communion because they kneel. Rather, such instances should be addressed pastorally by providing the faithful with proper catechesis on the reasons for this norm." In 2011, this section was updated. While still preferring the communicant to stand, there is more leeway. Quote, "The norm established for the Diocese of the United States of America is that Holy Communion is to be received standing unless an individual member of the faithful wishes to receive communion while kneeling." In other words, the norm is still to stand, but it doesn't call for priests to correct or catechize those who kneel anyway. Out of devotion, one is allowed to kneel. In regards to the actual reception of communion, the opposite approach can be seen in regards to in the hand or on the tongue, leaning more towards devotion. According to the 2004 Vatican document called Redemptionis Sacramentum, a communicant is always allowed to receive on the tongue, but must be given permission to receive on the hand. In practice, the choice is left up to the communicant in almost every country, including the United States. And so, which is the right way? Well, technically, the Church defers to the communicant's devotion, allowing a variety of options. But it does force us to ask an important question. Is communion really the right time to exercise private devotions or individuality? A better rule of thumb might be for the whole congregation to be of one heart, one voice, and one posture when we celebrate that which makes us one in faith.
I'm just going to bring in a letter on the norm of receiving Holy Communion. What is the norm of the Church? Because we have a norm and we have special permission or indult or exception to the norm. So what is the norm? I'm just going to bring you in a letter here that Cardinal William Goh, Archbishop of Singapore, published. So this is the letter that Cardinal William Goh, Archbishop of Singapore, issued to his priests regarding communion on the tongue. "I wish to clarify the reception of communion on the tongue. Regarding communion on the tongue, it is the universal norm and right of the faithful, whereas communion on the hand is an indult given to the Bishops' Conference of Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei. And it's also an indult to the bishops in America. People don't realize this. It's not up to our individual preferences here. There is a norm and there is an exception, an indult, a permission. And so what Catholics need to understand is, has this indult, this permission, increased Eucharistic reverence or decreased it over the last 50 years? Have any of the bishops that have pushed communion on the hand been canonized? Not a single one of them. Pope John Paul II never recommended communion on the hand. Pope Benedict never recommended communion on the hand. When I received communion from St. John Paul II in the Vatican, we were specifically told that you could only receive communion kneeling on the tongue from the Holy Father. A kneeler was brought up, you knelt down, you received it on the tongue, because that was the norm. And it still remains the norm, the universal norm. And so Cardinal Goh is confirming this here in his letter. That letter by Cardinal Goh is interesting because it comes a few weeks after I was denied communion on the tongue in his cathedral in Singapore. And I was very respectful. I just said to the priest, look, I made a vow, a promise many years ago to respect the Eucharist in this way, in the way I received communion from St. John Paul II, no less. Because that was the norm that was only in place during his papacy. And it still remains the norm of the universal church today. So leave your personal devotions aside and follow the norm of the universal church. None of the bishops that promoted communion on the hand back in the early 70s will ever be created saints. We have seen destruction upon destruction of reverence for the Eucharist since communion on the hand was introduced. It might seem, people say, well, it doesn't matter the outward signs, it matters your inward disposition, how you're prepared to receive our Lord. Of course, I understand this, but we are human beings. Our children see. If we treat something. I mean, if you go to a wedding in jeans or you go to a wedding in the suit, and people say, "Oh, it's fine. It's your inward disposition that matters." Well, I think people at wedding would say, "Well, could you not have made an effort just to come prepared for this wedding?" And yet, for our Lord, we don't make the effort. Look, for generations upon generations upon generations, we were nourished in that particular way for receiving communion. So we safeguarded the particles in the Eucharist. So many of the Eucharistic miracles stem from abuses of the Eucharist. How many times we find hosts in Ireland under pews? Not once, not twice. How many times do people take the host back to their seat and put it in their pocket? I've seen this. We should return to reverence the Eucharist, to reverence its the real presence of our Lord, and return to the norm. So here, this video is a catechesis on what is the norm of the Roman Rite. The norm of the Roman Rite, and you see that letter from Cardinal Go as well, is communion on the tongue. The exception, the indult, because this is what was received in the early 1970s, was the indult was an exception to the norm. And this is, something that I'm passionate about, because as we need to give a witness that what we are receiving is something different to what we normally receive. We treat food in this way, but this is the bread of heaven, the bread of the angels, and I really want to promote the return to the norm of the Roman Rite. Communion in the hand was never debated one single time in any of the documents in Vatican II. It was pushed by the ultra-modernists in the early 1970s. It was pushed into the American bishops by the ultra-modernists. And it has borne no fruits in the church. We have seen a disrespect to the Eucharist unlike we've ever seen before. Before Vatican II, universal, East and West, every single church received communion on the tongue. Orthodox, Catholics. And what we've seen now is a division in this reception of the Eucharist. It has borne no fruits. And so I urge Catholics to return to the norm. This isn't my opinion, guys. This isn't me inventing what is the norm, how we should receive communion. This is the norm of the church. And we should return to the norm of the church. Respect the Eucharist. Kneel and receive if you can. There's nothing wrong with it. You do great service to our Lord. An outward sign of an inward grace. Renew the Eucharist. That's my plea to the church. How we ended up with two forms of reception of the Eucharist in the Roman Rite is beyond me. If you think about it, in Japan, it was the French bishops that introduced communion on the hand. And it was Sister Agnes Sasagawa of Akisha, the wound appearing on her hand so that she couldn't receive communion because it was so painful for her hand. And the statue of Akisha, another wound appearing on the hand that the priest would use to give communion. And so Sister Agnes couldn't receive communion on the hand because of the pain she was experiencing, and so that she returned to receive it on the tongue. And this was all pushed by the modernist French bishops who had connections into Japan. And the sisters returned to receive on the tongue. This is a call from heaven to renew the Eucharist. Respect the body of our Lord. Return to the norm of the church. This is what Saint John Paul II promoted. He never allowed communion on the hand in the Vatican. Why do we think we are so different? Look around your parishes in America, in Ireland, England, all dying. On life support. We're talking about parish clusters, parish amalgamations, all this nonsense, because we have destroyed the essence of our faith over the last 50 years. And while reception of the Eucharist in by itself is not going to change you, there's a whole process here of renewal of the faith. it's one of the signs that it's one of the acts of humility that we can do. It's an act of humility to kneel. It is an act of humility to receive communion on the tongue, to be fed by the priest who acts in persona Christi. So return to the norm. Renew the Eucharist. God bless you. Take care. Bye-bye.